Thanks for joining us. This is episode 4 of the series on authoritarianism that we have been doing. We are trying a little bit of a different thing today. Really quickly, I want to review some of the concepts that we've talked about before, just so everybody's up to speed. The two things that we had discussed with regards to metrics for determining whether or not administration could be considered authoritarian, the Jacksonian effect, which is where the executive branch essentially ignores the rulings of the judicial branch, and then also the media coercion effect, which is where the government is compelling media sources to report particular friendly information, let's say. Um, Also, want to review the two core concepts from the book, How Democracies Die. Mutual tolerance, which is the idea that both sides see each other as co-equal administration potentialities, I guess you could say. And then also the idea of institutional forbearance, which is that in the combat or in the contest to determine who's going to be in charge, you don't burn down the entire system, right? So what's going to be different about today is that we're going to be talking about the Eric Adams case. Originally, we had planned on talking about Trump firing the DOJ officials and getting rid of the IGs, the inspectors general, and what that means, and whether or not we can come up with a new metric there. But Phil has told me that he wants to talk about the Eric Adams case specifically. Now, here's the thing: I don't know anything about it. I am, for some reason, I have been insulated from this, so I'm learning about it right now. This is my favorite because I don't have to do any reading. I don't have to know anything. I just get to be critical. So here we go. I trust Phil to share this issue fairly, and then we'll kick it around. So I'm handing it over to you, sir.
Okay, so for those of you who have been following this really closely, um, uh, Eric Adams is the mayor of New York, and he was charged with a number of crimes by the Department of Justice. And so it was getting ready to go to trial. Now, according to some of the reporting in the New York Times, there was a discussion between Eric Adams' people and the people who are in the Department of Justice, them basically asking for a pretrial pardon, pardon, so that he would be pardoned for the things that he was doing or accused of doing. He has not been found guilty. We always work on the presumption that somebody is innocent to proven guilty. So Mayor Adams is, as of right now, innocent. And so this, I want to start off with something, George. So, Juba, I'm just going to run something by you
Hmm.
first, before we go into this. Um, would you agree? And I'm not trying to be tricky or anything, that whether the Department of Justice decides to convict somebody, charge somebody, or go after somebody, it should be based on the evidence. Politics shouldn't have any role in that. That when they're going ahead and they're charging somebody, it should be without fear or favor. You charge people if you think that they've committed a crime. That's your responsibility as a U.S. attorney working for the federal government. Is that more or less accurate in your estimation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
My hope is
So
that both sides would adhere to that.
right, right. And that would be, and again, let's be clear, that should apply to everybody, right? There shouldn't be the only reason you charge somebody, you have a reason to believe that you're going to be successful in the case, that you have compelling evidence that you think is going to convince a jury of somebody's peers. And so we agree on that. So it's always good. One thing Jubal and I like to do is point out the areas where we agree,
Hmm.
because sometimes those get lost in the discussion. So here's what happened with Eric Adams. Apparently, Eric Adams' people met with, his name is Emil Bove. He's the acting U.S. Deputy Attorney General. Pam Bondi is the Attorney General. She's been recently confirmed. He's the acting U.S. Deputy Attorney General. And so what he did is he sent a letter to the Southern District of New York
Real
to
quick,
go ahead.
is he a new appointee or is he from the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
previous? Okay,
He's a new, but he hasn't gone through the nomination process, so that's why he's got the acting
got it.
title in front. like Pam Bondi is Attorney General,
But he's
right?
not from the previous administration. He's a new
Oh,
guy.
no, 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 no. All the higher ups are almost always let go in an administration, and so
Mhm,
that's he's one of them. So I think he was a lawyer actually, one of the defense lawyers in some of the cases that were brought against Donald Trump before he won the presidency.
mhm,
So he is somebody in his camp. So what Bove did is he sent a letter to the Southern District of New York. That's where Mayor Adams was charged, and he told them to drop the. He instructed them to drop the case, and he gave two reasons for why the case should be dropped. The first was he said that somebody's involvement in this case had tainted it, right, and so it wasn't a sort of a righteous prosecution, right. But the second reason was the one that caught my attention and a lot of people's attentions. Is basically what he was saying was that Mayor Adams having to go to trial detracted from his time and made it harder for him to carry out and work with the Trump administration on enforcing immigration, the sort of the immigration policies that they've adopted. And in particular, he said he wanted access. He wanted them to give him access to Rikers Island. Right now, the the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York is a woman named Daniela Sassoon. He got she resigned. Now, just to be clear, I want everybody to understand Danielle Sassoon is a conservative. She worked for Antonin Scalia. She is a member of the Federalist Society, which is a conservative think tank. Right. So this is a bona fide conservative. She wrote a letter Mr. Bove, and when I'm reading from part of her letter, Mr. Bove's memo directs me to dismiss an indictment returned by a duly constituted grand jury for reasons having nothing to do with the strength of the case, raises serious concerns that render the contemplated dismissal inconsistent with my ability and duty to prosecute federal crimes without fear and favor and to advance good faith arguments in the court. Essentially was saying, you're trying to tell me to drop this case for reasons that are not justifiable. And in fact, as we found out, she was getting ready to do a superseding indictment, add some additional charges, uh, uh, convicting, charging Mayor Adams with obstruction of justice. So what Bove did was he took the case from her, accepted her resignation, moved the case over to the Maine Department of Justice into a different branch, and the people there resigned. Two of the top people there resigned. One of the people who resigned was the lead prosecutor in the case against Mayor Adams, Hagan, Hagan, Scotton. He was the lead prosecutor, and he wrote a letter to to Bove, basically saying, and I'm going to read the part of the letter. Wrote any federal prosecutor would know that our laws and traditions do not allow using the prosecutor prosecutorial pardon, than it should be to say prosecutorial power to influence other citizens, much less elected officials. If no lawyer within the earshot of the president is willing to give him that advice, and I expect you um, will eventually find someone, and this is in his letter, who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me. Now, one of the things, and I'm sorry for getting into so many details,
mhm,
but one of the things that when Bove instructed them to drop the case without against Adams is they didn't offer a pardon. They didn't give him a pardon. They offered to drop the case. They want the judge to drop the case and the prosecutors to drop the case with prejudice. Now, when you drop something with prejudice, for those of you who don't know, Juba, you know what that means. That
right,
means that they can bring the case back up again. So what people are saying is that what they're essentially doing is they're saying, look, we want you to comply with what we want to do in terms of enforcing immigration reform. We're not going to pardon you, we're going to go ahead and ask for a dismissal without prejudice, so that basically you don't follow through.
So
You
it
don't
was with or without?
without prejudice,
Okay. Okay.
right? So, and
So
then
we could be brought up later.
right. And so there people are, you'll know the metaphor, the Damocles sword hanging over
Sure.
somebody.
Sure.
I don't know what the I actually don't know the origins of that metaphor, but I get the idea. So basically they're using their prosecutorial powers to go ahead and essentially coerce, um, this is the argument, Mayor Adams into doing something that he he for fear of being prosecuted. And so, that's speculative. But one of the things that happened was in a recent interview, um, Homan, the guy who is carrying out the deportation policy, he was talking in an interview, and used some colorful language to describe what he would do if Adams failed to follow through on his promise to let immigration agents into Rikers Island. And this is the quote: "If he doesn't come through, I'll be back in New York City, and we won't be sitting on a couch. I'll be in his office, up his butt, saying, 'What the hell is he? Where the hell is the agreement we came to?'" Now, to me, it sounds like what Homan is saying is what people are speculating is correct. But this is an effort to go ahead and use the threat of prosecution to get Mayor Adams to do um, what the Trump people want. Now, I think Adams was probably already on board with some of the things that Trump wanted to do, anyways. But going back to sort of our original comment that prosecution should be based solely on the strength of the evidence, that seems to me at least to go totally against that. And thus far, there have been 7 people in the Southern District of New York, many of them bona fide conservatives. One of them clerked for Justice Roberts. I think Hagan Scotton clerked for Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh. Right? That 7 people, I don't know the other 5 by name, have resigned rather than carry out this order. And
Mhm.
so, anyways, that's what's going on. Now, again,
So a
assuming,
couple
go ahead.
questions. Couple
Shoot.
questions.
Yeah.
First, I didn't realize that the Southern District of New York was so heavily populated with conservatives. That's interesting to know. But the
Can
two.
we pause on that for 1 second?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that people don't get is that in the Southern District of New York, and in the Department of Justice in particular, and this is true of the FBI, it tends to be a conservative institution.
Hmm.
It actually tends to be more conservative than liberal. These are the people who are populated. So there are many conservatives in the Department of Justice, and in particular in the FBI. In
Sure.
the FBI. So anyway,
Okay. So the two questions, just clarifications, really. The
mhm,
first is the the case itself. What Eric Adams is being charged with. My understanding is that he took some he took some liberties that he shouldn't have. Right. He got some gratuities that
that's some
maybe,
kickback. Yeah.
yeah, some stuff. He had his hand in the cookie jar, basically. I haven't heard anything really egregious. Like he's not cashing $1 million checks, but he was eating out, he was getting plane flights, that kind of stuff, right?
He
Uh,
was he was interfering in things that a mayor shouldn't interfere with, to his own financial advantage. And then
what does
apparently
that mean? Interfering with? What does that mean?
he was like, so there was I think that a Turkish group, people from Turkey, wanted access to a particular building. I mean, he's essentially he's being charged with basically taking kickbacks,
Okay,
using his office, and he's getting kickback. So what I can tell you is that
Sassoon.
Daniela Sassoon believes not only that they have a strong case, but it's like completely ironclad. She has no doubt,
Hmm.
and that she's adding to it. So I don't know the exact charges, but she's the one who brought the
So he
case.
had his hand in the cookie jar. We'll just say that that's the metaphor. What was the
Kind of.
tainted? The tainted person that was.
there was somebody who was working on the case that Bobe was talking about. I don't want to say his name incorrectly, but there was somebody who was on the case who was apparently there Bobe was concerned that um, he was unfairly it it meant that the case was not done fairly. But the reality is that regardless of who was on the case, and this is something that Danielle Sassoon points out, this case was brought before a grand jury. They were presented with the evidence, and they were the ones who issued the indictment. That whatever else is going on, that has been fine. If the judge could have, if these issues were raised, could have dismissed the case. They did not, and so by her estimation, this is a righteous case. That that go then her whole job is to um, go after lawbreakers without fear or favor. And so that's why she was so adamant about the idea of this not being dropped.
Okay. So we're not sure whether or not the person who Bove said was tainted was actually tainted,
It
or
was it what we're sure of is that both Sassoon and
Hagen.
Scott have both said that is has nothing to do with it. They both argued that is irrelevant. Um, the case goes before trial. Somebody has a chance to defend themselves. That's the way the process works. If they want to make that argument, they certainly can, right? But on the side of the government has more than enough evidence. And again, not only the charges already laid out, but a superseding indictment that was going to be coming, charging him with additional crime.
Mhm.
So the question is whether or not Bove interfering with that goes against that principle that we're talking about. And I realize you're just getting this. The prosecution should be based solely on the evidence, solely
Mhm.
on the evidence. And it seems to me that what both Sassoon and Scott are saying is that it's not what's happening. And if that isn't what's happening, and maybe we can pick this up later, if that isn't what is happening, then what does that represent? Because it seems to me that if that's what's happening, this is the federal government using its power to go ahead and coerce an elected official to do what they want him to do. And that, in
So,
my estimation, is clearly improper.
um, right. But it also sounds like, from what Homan said, that Adams had already agreed to whatever this thing with Rikers Island was. Let me ask this:
Yeah,
if Bondi had come out, or if Trump had come out and pardoned Eric Adams, right? Pre-pardoned him basically, and just said
right.
he's in the clear. Um, and then Adams had worked with the administration to get something done. Would you see that as a political use of the presidential pardon?
I mean, I would, yeah, right. But to me, it would not have say because as we've talked about in our other episodes, say what you want about the pardoning power. You
Mhm.
can complain about like the pardoning of the J6, the people who assaulted officers. You can complain and say, that was inappropriate. But he clearly has that power. So if he had pardoned, like done a preemptive pardon, I would still think it was a bad idea, right?
Mhm.
But it wouldn't look like the federal government was coercing an elected official to doing something. Then, in theory, if he was pardoned, then if Eric Adams felt that the federal government or immigration was doing something inappropriate or against the wishes of his constituents, he could say, no, this is where I draw the line. You can't do that. At this point, what he has is this sword hanging over him,
Mhm.
where if he doesn't follow through, they can say, okay, go ahead. That to me is more pernicious. So I think a pardon would have been inappropriate, but certainly well within the rights of of the president to do that. We
So if
talked
if
about the
Bovey
president.
had, if Bovey had asked for a dismissal of the case with prejudice, You wouldn't see that as
That that would exactly, that would be another thing where if you ask for a dismissal with prejudice, I have a feeling that Daniel Sassoon and Hagan Scott would have still resigned because they believe that they've got a righteous prosecution on their hands, and so their
Mhm,
job is to enforce the law. So I don't think either one of them or the five other people in the Southern District of New York who resigned, I don't think any of them would have gone along with it, right? But again, even that would have been, uh, it would still be problematic in my estimation. Um, but the whole doing it without prejudice uh,
mhm,
taints it even worse. So it looks like it's politically motivated in the first place. And second, it looks like the federal government not making a decision, not making decisions based on the evidence and the facts without fear or favor. It looks like they're using that power to coerce compliance uh,
mhm.
uh, among with Adams. So to me,
I
that yeah,
guess you'd
go ahead.
just you'd have to show that he was not. It seems like you'd have to show that he was not already compliant, and I feel like he the things that he has said about immigration and the nature of the statement that Homan made makes me think that he already was on board. And so maybe this you could make the argument, but this was like a kind of a quid pro quo thing. It's like, hey, if you're on board with us, then we'll suspend the case.
If it was
Uh,
if it was a quid pro quo, and Bove makes it clear that that's not how he sees it in a footnote. If
mhm.
it is a quid pro quo, I would argue that is a violation of federal law
So he
and an
specifically said
abuse of
this is
power.
not. Bovey said this is not a quid pro
In a
quo.
footnote in his document that he sent to the Southern District of New York. But to me,
Okay.
it clearly looks like one.
Okay. But he said it's not. He said he doesn't like the case. I guess the question becomes then, um, if you have a case, right? You have a case against someone. At any given time, I'm sure that we have a lot of cases against a lot of different people. Um, that how much do you have to move forward with the case if you don't feel like it's in the best interest of the country?
But if
Uh,
if you're only supposed to make decisions based on the facts and the evidence,
mhm,
right? The facts and the evidence, then if Ove wants it to be dismissed, it should have something to do with the facts and the evidence. But in his letter, he made it perfectly clear that's not what this is about. That's
mhm,
not what this is about. And so it is a violation of DOJ rules to go ahead and make prosecutorial decisions based on anything having to do with Paul. Should totally be
mhm,
on what is the evidence brought before them. This was a case that was brought before them, went to a grand jury. It's the evidence has been presented, um, and the way that they're doing it, me,
mhm.
uh, represents sort of the worst fears of the way the Justice Department is going to be used. So
Well,
that
okay. I don't know that I agree with that. I don't think the worst fears of the Justice Department are not prosecuting somebody, right? I think the worst fears of the Justice Department are using it to prosecute people who are not guilty, right? When you refrain from going after somebody, here's the thing. It seems like this all revolves around Bovey's statement that there's a person who's involved that's tainted, that is going to mess up this case. Again, you know more about the details than I do.
right,
The two people who are involved in the case say that's not true. So there's a difference of opinion there. Is it possible that Bovey knows more about how tainted this person is than the two prosecutors?
absolutely not. These are the two people who prosecuted the case.
Hmm.
These are the people who were in charge of the case,
So you think
and
it's just a
they are
smokescreen?
oh yeah, 100%. And they were so offended. Uh, this doesn't really matter, but it's like sort of a human element to this. Uh, Danielle Sassoon um, is 38 years old. She's been in the Department of Justice for like 10 years. She's relatively young. Again, impeccable credentials, solid conservative, and 8.5 months pregnant.
Hmm.
And rather than do something that she felt was violative of her obligations,
Hmm.
She stepped down. That's an important signal. When somebody who's on board with the president says steps down, um, that's an important thing. In Higgins Scott Stoughton,
She's on board with the president in what way? What do you mean?
she's so totally supportive of him.
Okay.
And then Scott Higgins Scotton is the same way. In his letter that he wrote before he resigned, he actually sent it. He just wanted to have a meeting with uh, Attorney General Bondi, talk about the case, and he made a point of saying that he knows that there are people who object to what's going on in the Trump administration. He's not one of them, but this oversteps the bounds. So he
Hmm.
made it clear he's somebody who's supportive of Donald Trump,
Hmm.
right? But he had to step down as well. And again, usually you don't see this kind of language. Lawyers are generally measured in the way um, that they do things. And so for him, in that last part, I'm going to read it again so people can hear it. When he talked about how any federal prosecutor would know that our laws and traditions do not allow prosecutorial power to influence other citizens, much less elected officials. And then this last point, which is the very last part of his letter, if no lawyer within the earshot of the president is willing to give him that advice, then I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me.
Hmm.
To me, this is somebody who's incredibly principled. I probably disagree with him as much as I disagree with you on politics,
Hmm.
right? But he's principled to the point that he's resigning a position. Somebody who is highly regarded. He was the head of the sort of the criminal division in the Southern District of New York. He worked side by side with Danielle Sassoon as like sort of co-chiefs of that part of um, the Southern District of New York. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But to me,
Yeah, I'm
this looks
uh,
like an abuse of power.
okay.
To me,
It's if this is a situation where they're trying to compel Eric Adams to do something that he doesn't want to do, then yeah, right. But if this is a situation where maybe they're helping Eric Adams and saying, hey, you know what, we'll put this prosecution on hold, on ice, or cancel this particular version of it, so that you can move forward with this agenda that we agree on. Um,
that
that
doesn't
doesn't
strike you as an abuse of power?
that doesn't smell as bad,
Wait.
right?
Is either he's guilty or he's not guilty. Either there's evidence enough to convict him or there isn't.
Hmm.
I thought we agreed prosecution should be based solely on the strength of the evidence. You're bringing in other factors that have
Well,
nothing to
hang
do
on.
with a prosecutor.
Prosecutions,
Prosecutor.
any prosecution should only be based on the facts. You shouldn't put somebody on trial because of their ethnic background, right?
Correct.
Obviously. So,
Obviously.
but to say that the initiation of a case against someone can never be paused or can never consider political implications, I don't think that that's true.
Which
Uh,
what like we've talked about before, presidents have discretion on um, guiding the providing to DOJ instructions on the kinds of things that they
mhm.
want to look. They want the
Right, but this
Justice
isn't Trump.
Department.
This is Bondi.
Well, but Bondi is Trump and Trump is
But
Bondi. I mean,
she's the one making the call, right?
right. Well, I think now she'll be stepping in and making the call. Prior to her confirmation, right? Bovey was the acting. It was Bovey's decision. He was the
But
one who communicated
he
with her.
reports to her.
Well, again, not until she was confirmed.
Okay.
So he was basically the guy in charge as sort of the acting U.S. Attorney General. So he was
So
making the
she's going to
decision.
step in and clear things up. The hope is that she's going to step in and
Right.
clear things up.
Well, it sounds like I just saw the beginnings of the report. It sounds like she's going along with this. But again, to me, if there is evidence, and it is beyond a reasonable doubt, that Eric Adams violated the law, right? And that's for a jury to decide, not for me to decide.
Mhm.
Like I obviously don't know all the facts in the case, but if the line prosecutors believe that there's a evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that he broke the law. And if DOJ interferes for political reasons in that prosecution, that to me is a clear violation of the norms of how DOJ is supposed to work.
Okay.
That
I
shouldn't happen that way.
I would say this. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I do think that, and maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I do think that there's two different issues here. One is that if a prosecution is political, meaning you're going after somebody for political reasons, you're going after them because they're your political enemy or they support a political agenda that you don't agree with, right? And so you're trumping up charges and you're forcing them to, to be punished.
Nobody,
That's
so
that's one
just to be
kind of
clear, nobody has made that claim
right,
in this case.
right. But what you seem to be saying is that prosecutions are compulsory if you have the evidence to go to trial. And I don't think that that's the case. I think at any given time, any the attorney general, any U.S. attorney is going to have a number of cases that would be slam dunk cases, but they are not taking them to trial for whatever reason, for various reasons, right?
But it matters what the reason is. So
Okay.
for whatever reason is doing a lot of work there. It matters what the reason. So if let's say they have limited resources, right? They know they've got the guy, but they have limited resources, or they've been instructed to not worry about corruption. Instead, they're going to be working on immigration, whatever it happens to be. But starts an investigation is one thing, but once you bring something to a grand jury and the grand jury finds somebody that there's sufficient evidence to proceed with a trial, you're in a new phase there. So
Hmm.
now they have to go back to the judge and they have to ask the judge to dismiss the case. The judge in this case is Judge Poe, who's uh, a Trump appointee, and so
But I
ultimately,
don't I don't hang on. I don't know that that's the case. If you are indicted by a grand jury, that does not necessarily mean that you're definitely going to trial.
no, no, because you're right. Because a lot of times you get indicted, right? And then what they do is they use that indictment to get additional information from you. If you're doing like a mob investigation, you
Hmm.
indict somebody, and once they're indicted, you say, "Hey, now look, if you cooperate with me,
Hmm.
right? You give us some evidence. We'll reduce your charges. We'll do things like that." If you decide not to prosecute for reasons having to do with the administration of justice, that's fine,
Hmm.
right? You're absolutely right. If you're doing it for political reasons or to put pressure on somebody, then that's not. That should never happen, ever happen.
Hmm.
And my fear is that's exactly what's going on. And it fits perfectly in line with sort of what Trump had talked about, his retribution tour and all that kind of stuff. That's what worries me about this. It's a terrible, terrible precedent. And I worry about the fact that people who are resigning, these are experienced, knowledgeable people who've
Hmm.
been working in DOJ and apparently have very, very um, clean records, whether they're liberal or conservative. They just are highly regarded.
Hmm.
And their decision to resign um, is, to me, a signal to people something bad's going on. These aren't Democrats. These aren't liberals. These aren't progressives. These are conservatives who
Hmm.
are saying this is wrong. And I think they should be listened to.
Okay.
So people on the left, obviously, they're going to like that, right? But it's people on the right and the center right could be asking themselves if the Biden administration, if the Clinton administration, if any administration did this, would it be okay? If it was a Republican who was charged, who had been charged with a crime, and the administration basically publicly held over their head the prosecution, and they said, as long as you comply with the things that we want you to do, we won't charge you with, we won't go through with this prosecution, but you fuck with us and we'll be all up in your butt, as Holman put it. That's a problem.
Yeah, but that's not Homan saying that he's got the power to bring the case against him. Look,
No, he's what he's
they're
talking about. What he's, I think that that's what the threat is.
okay.
When he's saying, if you don't follow through, if we don't feel like you're doing enough to help us with our immigration plans,
Hmm.
then
Which
we
Adams has
reserve the
already
right.
has already said he's interested in doing, right? So it's sort of
Right.
like you don't need to do that. You don't need
Except,
to
okay, which makes it even worse. If
it
they could just drop the case.
mhm,
If they want to drop the case, again, I still think that all these people would still have resigned. I think they will, and I think there may be more that come.
mhm,
They will they that are going to resign rather than carry out this order, this dismissal. And it'll be interesting to see what Judge Ho does as well. Um, they could have just dropped the case, or Trump could have pardoned him, and they did. Trump didn't pardon him, which he
mhm.
clearly could do because it's a federal crime that he was
But
charged with.
if Trump had pardoned Eric Adams,
I would still be concerned about
we
it.
would
I
still
would
be
still
having this
work.
conversation. Or
It
something
would
similar to
not.
this conversation.
It would be something similar to this conversation, but I would have to say and be honest about it that Trump has that authority.
Mhm,
Constitution clearly gives it to him. So in the same way that the pardoning of the January 6th people who attack law enforcement, I found it objectionable. I think it is a frightening, it's a condoning of political violence and a message that if you commit violence on my behalf, I'm cool
yep.
with that. I got your back. I would still agree with all that, but people who were talking about how he was abusing his pardoning power, it's like you can't abuse your pardoning
Right.
power. It's one of those few things where the framers didn't put any checks and balances on it.
I well, I don't know if you can't abuse your pardoning power. I'm sure we could think of a way that you could do that.
No, I
The
mean abuse like in a legally tenable, you can be charged with a crime thing.
okay.
Yeah, I think there are clearly instances.
So Trump
I think
could have completely absolved Eric Adams.
correct.
Instead, he partially absolved him.
He didn't even partially absolve him. We can speculate as to why. He didn't even partially absolve him. He left it to his underlings to do that work. So he left it to the acting deputy attorney general to go ahead and pressure SDNY, so the Southern District of New York, for those who don't know that
Mhm.
acronym, pressure SDNY to go ahead and drop the charges and drop the prosecution without prejudice.
Okay. So to me, there's two things that this whole issue revolves around. Again, this is the first I've heard of it today.
Right.
It is
Understood.
the nature of the tainted individual that Bovey was referring to. What exactly does that mean? How do we know that this individual is tainted? How would that ruin the case? That's number one. And number two is was Eric Adams cooperating with the immigration agenda of this administration already? And if so, then why is the threat necessary? Right? Why this or the perceived threat? You're saying that there's a threat here. It may be that they're just dismissing it without prejudice because they don't need to do anything more than that. They know the case won't be brought again. Right? Uh,
I
I
don't
don't.
know the case.
I don't know.
I don't know what the statute of limitations are on this particular crime, but it could be that the next president wasn't corrupt. It would wind up being that those charges could be brought up again. Now, again, if the statute of limitations runs out, then
Mhm,
then he would be free from prosecution. So again, the two things that Bobby said in his letter, he mentioned the person, I think Damian Williamson was the person that he mentioned. The second thing he mentioned was that he specifically said that having to defend himself in court would make it take up so much of his time that he wouldn't be able to help the administration carry out their immigration plan. He
mhm.
made it political, very political, blatantly political, right? And so, again, whether you
So
maybe when
Adams
you
said
look at
that. Adams said,
no.
"Oh,
In Bovey's letter to the Southern District of New York, the two things that he
okay."
mentioned, I think his name was Damian Williamson. It's coming back to me. He mentioned him, but the second thing he mentioned as to why the case should be dismissed, and this is what everybody reacted to so strongly, was the idea that um, him being prosecuted would take away his time and make it harder for him to help the administration with their immigration policies. That is blatantly political. That has nothing to do with the facts in the case. That's not prosecution without fear or favor based solely on the evidence. And maybe we can pick this up next week
So yeah,
or
but
on
if
in the next video.
if he hadn't said that, if Bovey hadn't said that, would you have any other problem with this?
I would have a problem with him interfering with the prosecution anyways, right? If he's innocent, I want him to go to court. I want his innocence to be demonstrated. I
Hmm.
always worry about people who are being charged by the federal government because there's always this imbalance. Federal government has so many resources, private
Sure.
individuals not so much. So I want somebody to have all the resources available to them, all the rights that they have available to them, be able to fight a prosecution. And if it's an unlawful prosecution or a not well substantiated prosecution, give them the opportunity to go ahead and clear their name,
Hmm.
right? Clear their name. And so, yeah, so I would have a problem with Bovee interfering with this regardless. The way he did it
Hmm.
is particularly egregious, and the norm it sets and the precedent it sets. And I don't care if it's done by a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, but using the power of the federal government and the power to go ahead and charge someone with crimes and prosecute them in order to coerce them to go ahead and carry out policies that your administration is in favor of is deeply, deeply troubling. Deeply
Hmm.
troubling, busting apart of the norms. And back to what you originally started on this video about the idea of you don't use every means at your disposal to get
Hmm.
done, that you show some sort of um, uh,
Institutional forbearance.
institutional forbearance. This is the opposite of that. This
Hmm.
is the opposite of that. And one,
If your suppositions are correct.
yeah, oh, always. Yeah.
Uh, okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds then.
Right. And just keep in mind that my suppositions are actually the suppositions of Danielle Sassoon and the suppositions of Hagen Scotton.
Mhm.
These are the people who raised this. These are the people who resigned, along with five other people, out of principle. And these are not anti-Trumpers. Well, some of them may be. I don't know. Usually in the department, people's politics are irrelevant. But in this particular case, top people the two top people, the lead prosecutor and the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, a long-standing Republican. Well, she's 38, not how long-standing you be, but lifelong Republican, member of the Federalist Society,
Sure.
clerked for Scalia. This is somebody whose bona fides as a conservative are question, beyond question. And so, yeah, to me, this is problematic. And so,
Okay.
I don't know if we should just stop this or if we want to just jump into the
No,
fodder of the.
we can halt here. We can call this an episode. And I wonder if is there something that we can use from all of this to I would say two things. First, what do we watch for? Like what do we look for on this issue to sort of come to a conclusion? Because I feel like we've got a lot of plates spinning as we end
Right.
this episode, right? So
Well,
what are we gonna do you want to make predictions or do we just say
I don't know about predictions. I do think there's a possibility that you'll see more resignation. I think
okay,
for the Southern District of New York has um, a notorious sort of reputation for being independent. Um, so, um, what I forgot what they're called, what they call themselves. It's a play on words, sort of like they're this independent entity. They've always been that way.
mhm,
So I do think that what you may see are other resignations. I think when people voluntarily give up their job out of principle, doesn't mean they're always right, but when you do something that is personally costly to you,
mhm,
personally costly, one, you're going against the president of the United States, and two, you're giving up a job that you probably worked really hard to get. When somebody does that, it sends a powerful signal.
okay.
And I think that signal should be listened to.
I think that, and this is maybe something that you and I that we have our differences on, and we've talked about similar situations over time. I'm not as moved by people resigning as you are. I know that there are a lot of reasons why people can resign, and there are a lot of reasons, even in this situation, that could be internally political. That these people decided to leave, for whatever reason. So I'm I can't judge the nobility of a person by the fact that they walk off their job. So I'm more interested in looking at the actual facts of what's happening, right? I want to know more about this person who is supposedly tainted. I want to know more about Eric Adams and whether or not he had already agreed. It was in line with the Trump administration as far as immigration is concerned. I feel like he was. I feel like he's already said that in public well before any of this stuff took place. But let's let him come out, make a statement, and clarify it. Let's let Bondi come out, make a statement, and clarify it. If there's a situation where you know, where, as you say, they're intentionally hanging a sort of Damocles over Eric Adams' head, right? Then yeah, I would have a problem with that. But so far, I'm not convinced that that is what is happening, right? Now, maybe that's my blindness, but I would like more information before I come to that conclusion. So let's watch for it. Let's watch
Right.
for statements from him. Let's watch for statements from her. And then I guess also my question would be going forward. Um, would would you say that selective prosecution, meaning not prosecuting somebody because it's politically advantageous to not prosecute them, is equivalent or as bad as prosecuting a political enemy? Like, are those two things
Well, I
equivalent?
mean, if you're talking about prosecuting a political enemy, and going after political enemies, that is a particularly pernicious way of using the federal power. So absolutely. So any directive on the part of any president to go after political enemies is deeply problematic and a violation of all kinds of rules. So that is particularly problematic. Um, I think not prosecuting somebody where there's an ample amount of evidence that you feel you could get a prosecution, that can be done in the example that I gave before, where you decide not to prosecute somebody, but you do it in furtherance of enforcing the law. So you don't go after the low scale gangster because you want to get the gangster above them.
Hmm.
Not there can be some legitimate reasons for not prosecuting somebody, but they should all have to do with the enforcement of the law, the administration of the law, and seeking justice. It should never be a political decision, ever,
Hmm.
ever.
Okay, all right.
So,
So let's put a pin in it, and we'll come back to it. This is interesting. I guess I've got some reading to do. So okay, we'll call that an episode. And is there anything you want to say in closing before we wrap up for the day? What do you think?
um, there was one thing I thought about you, and I thought about the last episode that we talked about, and we were talking about um, why Donald Trump pardoned the people who clearly attacked police officers. I don't want to make it clear to anybody listening. People's already made it clear that he did not think that that was a good decision, or he thought that was a bad decision. And that sort of, if I recall correctly, um, the argument was that he did that as a sort of fuck you to Democrats, and that was sort of that. Maybe that's summarizing
It
it.
was a half and half. Just a real quick retread. A half and half. It was on the one hand, I think Donald Trump very much wanted to put the January 6th issue in the past. But to be completely honest, I don't think he was alone in that. I think the American people very much want to put January 6th in the past. And so I think that was the main impetus behind it. But I also think that there were a lot of people who were swept up in the investigation. That there was, you had a very zealous FBI that was looking for convictions, and people ended up paying maybe a little bit stiffer penalties than they should have for simply milling around in the Capitol building for an hour and a half. And so those two things together, I don't think balance out the fact that you still have 50 plus really bad actors that were pardoned and or had their sentences commuted that really should still, I think, be in jail. So, it, but if our guiding philosophy is you let 10 guilty people go free before you imprison one innocent person, then it sort of is balanced in that sense. That said, I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
Well, okay, but just again, so was it that he didn't want to take the time to go through each of the cases? I mean, because
That may have been as simple as that. It's just we
because
want to we want to get this done now, early first week.
he could have easily identified, said, I pardon everybody unless they were convicted of assaulting a police officer.
Agreed.
Right. He chose not to.
Chose not
And
to.
so, right. And so a couple days ago, he was being interviewed. I think it was in the Oval Office, and a reporter asked him, because he was going to be meeting with first responders that day. And they said, you're going to meet with first responders that day, but you pardoned hundreds of people who assaulted first responders. And this is what Donald Trump said. He said, I pardon people who were assaulted themselves. They were assaulted by our government. They didn't assault, they were assaulted. And what I did was a great thing for humanity. He denied that people were even assaulted.
Okay.
It seems to me that that calls into question your theory that it's not just that people were overcharged, but he seems not to believe that the people who assaulted police officers actually assaulted police officers. And I'm sure you know people assaulted police officers. You're not like, no,
Right. No, it's
nobody.
it's on video.
Right, yeah, right. Okay, clear. So I just wondered, when I saw that, I just thought, I think this calls into question Jubal's theory about what was going on. So I just wanted to
I
put that in there just to connect up some of our past videos when
right.
things happen. And I'll give you the last word.
Honestly, I have given up trying to understand much of Donald Trump's decision-making process. I don't so I try to just look at policy and outcomes. I don't agree with pardoning the worst actors on January 6th. I think the main thrust of it was that he wanted to put the issue in the past, and I think he did. I think that he has, right? So maybe that's the greater good. But I don't like having 50 plus people walking free that really should be in prison. So yeah,
And I would say that maybe in your universe, in the world, that you inhabit, January 6th is behind us. Um, I don't think that that's what the American people think. And I think if you look at public opinion polls, they'll show that a large percentage of the American public believe that pardoning the people who assaulted police officers was a bad decision. I think
I
even among, I
no,
think
I think
even
you're right.
among, I think even among Republicans, there's a fair majority of people in one poll, Republicans, um, who thought it was a bad idea, just
I
like you
wouldn't
did.
agree with that. I wouldn't disagree with that. I
Right, right.
I I think uh, that the feeling on the center right is that was a dumb way to handle it, but it's handled, right? I think that's basically the feeling. Now, agree or disagree, I think that's where most people are coming from. Again, I don't like seeing I don't like seeing people who've hurt police officers walking around, and I would do things differently. But we've talked about that. People can watch the previous episode. Let's call it here. We'll see you again soon. Take care.